Myron Swiston here, and I'd like to continue on the abstract expressionist. I'm going to mention some pop art today, and of course Paul Klee from Switzerland, Swiss artist, and Clement Greenberg. But I'm also going to talk just a couple of notes about myself. A few years ago, of course, I had a tumor up here, and they gave me a choice: lose my eyesight or lose my hearing. So, of course, I do have my eye, and I do have my sight, and so that's good. But I'm totally deaf here, and so sometimes I push my ear in here, and that kind of there's a hole in here that they can't plug. And this ear here picks up and tries to compensate for the other ear. And it was a traumatic experience in my life and gave me more focus. It was a dark time on not knowing that my life was going to be over. I accepted that. And so that didn't happen, of course, so I made up my mind totally to this focus on art practice, making art, and trying to lower my entropy, my ignorance. So from all different kinds of sources, I try to fill up and, chase the silliness out of me. So today I'm doing videos, and I want to do this and pay homage to all the artists who have helped me to become the person, visual artist that I am today. I did mention Paul Klee and his two books, The Thinking Eye and The Nature of Nature. They're both fantastic for working artists. What he's doing, of course, let's say for example it's a leaf. You see the leaf, you see its outer activity, but the inner modulations, the fluids that go through, the breathing, photosynthesis that's there. He shows that. He goes through the picture plane and begins to show you how to find your way through the picture plane and what it is in the picture plane and what works, what doesn't work, using very few means with no literal interpretation of visual reality that he was looking at. It was totally from himself. These two textbooks are fabulous in terms of developing more vision, more sight, and so on. Since the advent of all these little digitized things, the recent study is that these little iPads and electronic devices are lowering our capacity to see a wide range of color. Lowering. So that doesn't bode well for the future and visual awareness. The Cubists, of course, Picasso, they got together, formed Cubism with Georges Braque. Hard to identify one and the other. But what happened, I guess, Georges Braque went to the front on the First World War, took a bullet in the head. I don't know if it was extracted or not, but from that point he just continued with Cubism, didn't develop Cubism beyond its initial stages, kept reinventing the wheel again in each kind of subject matter that he would do, but never really developed any further. Picasso, on the other hand, developed the figure, the Cubism, of course. Let me just condense you, of course, the line and planes. Picasso and Braque using foreshortening, coming toward and falling away, and influenced, Picasso directly influenced William de Kooning in the United States. And so throughout Picasso's career, he continued on with the rearrangement, reassemblage of the picture plane in color and form and line, and it went to the carburetor of this man's creative process. And likewise, in the hand of de Kooning, he used the figure extensively, even in a sense of a grotesque nature in some way. Picasso showing all forms of genitalia, and both male and female, and obviously de Kooning doing the same thing. It was very important. I was just thinking while I was talking about this, the other video, I was just thinking about this blur painting from Gerhard Richter. But what we have, of course, Francis Bacon, British figurative painter, is the blur faces, the blur portraits. That, of course, we have a lot of mimickers that are doing the blur portraits and blur, mostly in the head, confining in the head area. So the portrait is indistinguishable from a blur, and is it a person? I'm not sure. Is the person real? I'm not exactly sure. But it mimics this Gerhard Richter's, of course, blur paintings. Interesting the way your mind works and associates. Clement Greenberg ratified Canadian painting. When he came to Canada, 62 Emma Lake, art critic, with the painters there, Regina 5, Prairie Painters as I call them, Painters 11 in Toronto, 57 visits with the artists in their studios. Harold Town, of course, did not want a studio visit from Clement Greenberg, basically because I guess he thought that the American influence maybe might open up his eyes, or he wanted to stay with his own style of painting. He did use some abstract means, but known for his draftsmanship and his toy horses, hobby horses. And he was connected very strongly with Rosedale, the CBC. He was really painting abstraction for a time there, but came back to his hobby horse. So he got taken care of financially, sold out shows, very much so. 1956, William Ronald in the Coots Gallery, being visited by Clement Greenberg, of course, and William Ronald, Jack Bush, and Jacques MacDonald hitting it off squarely because of their attempting this unenculturated, unedited painting that they were doing at the time. It was easy for, of course, the Automatises group, Riopelle and Bourgeois, to zip down to New York in a 4, 5, 6 hours, drive down to New York, and visit with these artists in their studios and in the galleries to find out what was going on with the abstract world. Riopelle left Montreal, of course, to venture to Paris, where he met all the other top artists at the time, of course, Matisse, Picasso, Miro at the time. And so he became a big world artist. Probably never would have become a big world artist staying in Montreal. In later life, he came back to Montreal, Quebec, and painted Canada Geese and some other things, but is known for his painterly abstraction. Of course, he looked at Jackson Pollock with his drip action painting, but with Riopelle, he used the palette knife in very energetic manner, bright colors, thick paint, thick oil paint. The Painters 11, of course, they were in central Canada, and of course were definitely influenced by Clement Greenberg, his visit, saying, hey, you guys are doing good things, keep up, keep doing the work, of course. And they were influenced by the Painters 11 in New York. They traveled there to see what was going on. Of course, Barnett Newman, abstract painter in New York, influenced, of course, Ken Lougheed of Regina 5, Prairie Painter. The Prairie Painters, Regina 5, the sense of space and flatness. that was their sense of scale, big scale. Ken Lougheed, of course, imbued his work with the color field and large geometric shapes. Probably as well, he probably was aware, no doubt, of Mark Rothko. But his direct influence, of course, was Barnett Newman with those bright color fields of color. Definitely, Canada abstract painting was influenced by the abstract painting in New York, no doubt about it. The West Coast, Emily Carr doing her own. She lived inside of nature. She felt the pulse of nature. She was intersected with nature, and the paintings are just monumental paintings of trees and forest and moss and lichen and so on. Also on the west coast of Canada and Vancouver, Victoria area, Jack Shadbolt used abstract painting with his painting. Bright colors, flat-shaped design, abstract, no literal transposition from pictorial representation. Of course, he used the totem pole, Aboriginal symbols in his work, and great painter, fairly isolated, but not without being known by the rest of Canada and the rest of the world as a great painter. Of course, on the prairies, there was also, extended family from the Regina Five. Otto Rogers was also painting in that area of this flatness, earthy flatness of the space of the prairies. And that was a really significant Canadian painting with Clement Greenberg, ratifying Canadian painting, helping them with their vision, and being a very well-versed art critic, looked outside of his education, kept looking, kept trying to clear away his eyes to be able to see painting. And throughout history, he had many favorites of different styles of painting. At the time, of course, the pop art movement started, rejection of abstract expressionism. And the three painters, of course, Jasper Johns, painting the flag with the bright colors, and working in encaustic, he painted the number series 1 through 9, 10, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Stayed within the culture. Andy Warhol, of course, doing this poster art, Marilyn Monroe, and Roy Lichtenstein doing comic cuts with text. And so they were enculturated with the culture. They have done extremely well financially and successful accreditation at the Museum of Modern Art of their work. Totally enculturated. Nothing, if you look at it, that's what it is. It isn't something that you have to think about. It is there, and that's what it is. So that it had immediate acceptance. It was a poster art. It was common elements. There wasn't anything that was beneath the surface there. There were no groping, no peeling away, no just giving it back in the way that they had received it. And so to speak, a mirror held up to the culture and showing back just what the culture was seeing and creating as their icons or cultural icons. And the pop artists, they did that, mirrored back, reflected back to the pop artists, their culture. And so that was okay. But Clement Greenberg's idea on the popular culture as well found it vacuous and rather empty. Clement Greenberg was looking for a deeper bite on reality, a more sustaining vision, and again, a man who is well versed in ways of creation, the artist and the environment, and the trying to articulate the environment in which the artist was doing his work, the impact on the everyday sequence. That was important. So he understood that, and he was very, very visually literate. And that's why, of course, he was invited to MLA, because of his literacy. His visual literacy was without compare at that time. And so some of the Painters 11 I knew. I knew Harold Town. I knew William Ronald. I knew Ray Mead. I was starting out at that time. Of course, William Ronald had a show at the Coots Gallery in New York, 1957. Of course, Clement Greenberg loved the show, loved the work, and they were doing Jock McDonald, and Jack Bush was also there and liked the work. Clement liked Jack Bush's work, and Jock McDonald's work, and William Ronald's work. I knew those artists, and they were some of my guideposts when I was starting out an abstract expressionist. So I learned it firsthand in talking to them. Of course, Harold Town was doing very well. He was supported by the Rosedale, CBC, the National Gallery, the Ontario Gallery. They accepted him because he was blue blood amongst the Rosedale crowd, CBC crowd. So he didn't really need any further help, and he didn't want Clement Greenberg. Maybe perhaps he was afraid of Clement Greenberg and afraid of abstract expression, which he didn't inculcate in his work before returning to his draftsmanship and his hobby horses, toy horses, hobby horses, and so on in his work. And they earned a living, William Ronald doing window design, set design and windows. And of course, all these artists, of course, are still pre-computer time. So a lot of what they learned, they had to go and see the gallery. They had to go and visit with the artists to see what they were doing. So there was some travel involved in what they were doing. But of course, Bourdois and Riopelle could zip down to New York and see what was going on in New York. Riopelle went to Paris and again stayed with new Matisse and Picasso and Miro in Paris. So it was good. I don't know if Riopelle staying in Canada would have got to the astrosphere in terms of his prices. Of course, going to New York, he saw Riopelle, Jean-Paul Riopelle must have seen Jackson Pollock using his drip action painting, and of course, Riopelle used with a palette knife bright colors, heavily thick oil paint, constructed paintings. You can see, you know that they're constructed, they're put together, they're solid. They're works of art. They have some semblance of mastery in them. They were, Bourdois, of course, was isolated in Montreal, perhaps language, but Central Canada, of course, Painters 11 held a big sway over the time and the central ideas of abstract expression. At the time, Canada was the Group of Seven, landscape painting, Tom Thompson, and so on. Just those small paintings and some bigger ones, Lauren Harris. At that time, they were enculturated, and Canada did not want to let new blood in, did not want to let these wild beasts come into the scene. And the Group of Seven was so enculturated in the culture and the ideology of Canada, so that this new abstraction really took everybody by storm. But fortunately, Clement Greenberg helped the show Coots Gallery for William Ronald in New York, and visits from Clement Greenberg to Emma Lake, Regina 5, and the studio visits to Painters 11. The homage we have to share with everybody, all the artists, and we learn from all these artists. I've learned a lot from all these other artists, time past, Vasari and Da Vinci and Botticelli, of course, Michelangelo. There are many artists that we have to continue to look at as part of our learning process, so that we can continue beyond abstract expressionism to modernist ideas, which is still, I would still say abstraction, but rearranged in a new way, incorporating the figure, landscape in there. But it's all a creative time for Canadian painting. Canada was a very young country, First World War, Second World War, earning its place in the world, and the painters sure helped. Perhaps we didn't need to spill blood in First and Second World War, but they put us on the world stage as representing some kind of freedom and the support of freedom throughout the world. Today, of course, abstract expressionism has gone out into the world of painting. To come back, of course, there was the Modigliani, elongated forms, elongated nudes in Paris, 17th, right around the war, First World War time, New Picasso and so on, had a very tough life. The enculturation process in which he was trying to fight in Paris, the layers would have been much more substantial in the Classicism, and their European tradition would have been layered quite heavily. So somebody like Amadeo Modigliani, elongated figures. Of course, he was borrowing. We began to look outside of the European continent for inspiration. The light in North Africa, Morocco, where Paul Klee and Matisse visited to paint, with the light as a major subject matter. But I think, that the human hand involved in this physicality of making art, where the image and the hand leaves off and begins, that's kind of really essentially important, because it has a signature to it that was made by a man or made by a woman or was made by a working artist in some way. That is, I think, going to increase in the future. As a working artist, of course, I have to continue to look at art. I continue to look at archaeology, anthropology, psychology, ideologies, and try to unenculturate myself, so that I don't remain isolated, that I am sensitive to what is going on artistically around the world. And that impacts, and through learning and growing, we lower the entropy of myself, contributing to lowering the entropy of the society in which we live, and so thereby decrease the drag of negative, decrease the drag of cement and ideas which are no longer valid in the 21st century, which are in now. So learning is really a part of growing, of replacing the old, and consider our human body with 100 trillion cells, and our gut with 300 trillion cells, It's amazing the capacity for a living organism to coordinate so many various activities and be in harmony within a single body. So I think these are ideas which I think we can get forward. And if we can have 100 trillion cells, physical cells in the body, and the 300 trillion in the intestines working together, we should be able to master all of the other kinds of things, problems that are in the world. Thank you so much again. I'm going to continue. Painters 11, Regina 5, Bourgeois, Automatises in Quebec. I'm going to touch upon some of these key guys, key players in there. I did, I think, mention Otto Rogers in there. There are some other players in the Regina area, prairie painters, and I think that is important, that part of the land, the physical part of Canada is important in art practice in going forward. And it's a reference point. It's where our feet stand on the day, every day. And we're contributing to the humanity that we have together, which is most important. Thank you again for your time, and I'll see you soon. Bye.